G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a little bit of a catch up on some of the R&D that we've been doing and a little bit of a general talk about some other stuff. Start off with what I've got in front of us is the chassis that I use with my BMG action, which I shoot in both the 416 Barrett and the 50 BMG. Been doing a little bit of R&D, a little bit of testing of bits and pieces. And I suppose first of all I'll start off with the chassis in front here. It's as I've been using it. This is a chassis from Dolphin Rifles in the UK. Great chassis. I did a little work down the back of it, made it a little bit heavier in places where I wanted to, and I put my sliding bipod system on the front here. For those that have been following us and what we've done on that score, it's been through several evolutions. And during that process, we got asked some questions about whether we could make something for people to sell, which is what we have done. I hadn't actually been running that on the rifle. I've been running my system, which had a bipod. I've forgotten where I got the bipod from, but it was a big, heavy BMG bipod that just skidded, and I turned it into rigid, and then to get myself some flexibility, that's why I designed the sliding bipod system. For those that don't know what I'm talking about that sliding mechanism there. That's what I'd done for me, and then when people asked about it, I thought, okay, I can build something that you can bolt things to, which is what you're looking at here now, which is not the bipod, it's just a rail, bearing blocks, and a mounting block below here that's all drilled to accept an arca attachment, like what we've got here, where the arca rail, the V on the bottom here, so it can clamp on there, or drilling holes in there that can accept a Picatinny rail and put a normal bipod that takes a Picatinny rail on there. So all sorts of choices, but that's what I've sold a few around the world. And I thought, well, to be truthful, I came to a situation where I wanted to do some testing, which I'll get through to in a minute, but what I actually wanted to do was get lower than I could get on the bipod I had. So when I was trying to think about what I could do there, I thought, wait a minute, why don't I just bolt on the system that I sell to other people and see how that actually works? And that lets me run this, in this case, this 5H bipod that from Atlas, which is a big bulky thing, and in most cases I feel it's a bit of an overkill, and there's things that I like about it and things I don't like about it, sort of stuff, but still a very good bipod. But that would work really well in this situation. Great big heavy rifle, heavy being sort of the 20 kilo sort of rifle is what this turns into, but the ideal situation, and it let me get down lower. It's also got on these things here, they're a very wide stance. That's in its lowest form. You can see how wide the legs are, so very good on that score, and see how it actually shot. And listen, I was super impressed. I've got an image here of how it actually worked, but it gives me an extra feature that actually, listen, I felt the rifle shot a lot nicer, to be truthful, versus what it had already done. And I'll explain that a little bit. What I'd already done was just rigid, like I said, a very rigid bipod that just meant that then I had the slide system to let the rifle cycle. With mounting the Atlas bipod to it, I get a little bit of the world I'm much more familiar with. I get this preload ability where you can actually, a bit hard to do on a smooth surface, but you can preload against this natural spring in the bipod, which is what I've always wanted. But if I just had that bipod on here, there's too much movement in the actual in the cycle or the recoil of the rifle, then I'd end up where the bipod would actually skid. So each shot you're skidding your bipod, and that's not the best for precision shooting, of course. So this combines both. It means that I get the preload of the bipod, and then I still, when it goes past that point, it still gets to cycle only a little bit back, which means the feet stay planted on the bipod. What it produced was something that felt less felt recoil is what I actually had. And as you saw, very flat cycle, really nice, and listen, really, really positive. And maybe that is the final dot in the I's and crossing the T's on making this platform well as well, the 50 work as well as it could. I don't know, we've got to go through and test that. In front here I have a couple of bits and pieces, which is the other part of the story. As once again people have been following us, you saw what I was up to in the way of taking the normal 50 BMG primer, which is also in the 416, and taking it down to this has been fired and there's a story to go with this, but taking it down to a large rifle primer. Now, it was a Magnum large rifle primer, and I suppose I'll explain what I was up to there. What I was up to is one of the things that we fight in precision rifles is the shock of the explosion causing vibrations, which causes everything to vibrate in a very fine, high frequency nature, which causes the barrel to move, whether it's the recoil action or it's just the shock of the explosion, and that causes less accuracy. You have a tiny bit of vibration and your group's going to open up a tiny bit. Now, and for those that don't understand what I'm talking about there, when you pull your trigger, no matter where you're actually pointing, there is an instant, there are microseconds of movement in the rifle as the bullet is moving down the barrel, which means that there's lots of things we have to do to make sure that shoots really accurate. It's not just hold it really still and pull the trigger. There's lots of other stuff that happens in that instant as you pull the trigger, or just after. The logic of coming back to our primer side of things is the softer I can make that start, the smoother that power comes on and pushes that bullet, the less and later the shock going through the rifle. In theory, the less vibration is going to be at the muzzle as that bullet releases. So, and I have proven that already. I know that. I've seen that in just coming from a Magnum primer to a large rifle primer in some of the Magnum rounds that I shoot. And for those that aren't aware of that, Magnum primers aren't for Magnum rounds. Magnum primers are just more powerful primers for when you need them. In cold conditions, in very slow burning powder, for when you need them is what they're there. They're not, Magnum doesn't go with Magnum. They are just terms of larger or more powerful. And I've certainly done that. I've taken Magnum rounds and gone back to large rifle primers and made them shoot more accurately, more consistently, and make them all work properly. Sometimes you're resetting your load a little bit because there's a little bit of power in your primer that you can then put more powder in, yada yada, but I've found that work really nicely. So that's the same theory I was going with here. I've got this great big primer, and to reduce it to a smaller primer. More set out through the 416, in the fact of the amount of powder in those bits and pieces. Mind you, there's not that much different ultimately, but that's where the logic came from. And I ran into some problems. Well, I'm testing to see if I can make it work. And I suppose I'd cut to the end right now and say, oh, I think it doesn't work. Okay, so what am I actually saying there? It's a fail of an idea, is what I should say. I think there's still ways to try and make it work, but I don't know if it's worth it. In front of us, we have the last test and what actually happened. This is the big primer that worked fine, everything worked really well, and we did our testing with. This is one of the small primers that fired, but if you have a look at that brass, it's all dirty and black on the outside, like something happened to the brass. And here's what happened 3 times, which I have to tell you is fairly scary. It went bang, the primer fired, and it didn't ignite the powder. So that's a fairly nervous time when you've got to count to 30 and count to 60 and count to 90 and then lift the bolt and pull it out with something that might be on a slow cook, and I don't really want a 50 cal round to go off in my hand in a slow cook. So that's a fairly nervous thing, lifting them out, not something I want to do or something I'd recommend. But with this, I did a couple of days of testing like this and saw a couple of results like this. To start off with, what I actually did for these is I took a normal 50 BMG round. I made a stainless steel adapter that goes in there and presses into where the firing pocket is, and then put the large rifle primer inside there. In theory, that was all going to work. What happened, as happened with this one actually, is the ones that did fire went click, bang. A good second, maybe it was only half a second, it felt like 5, but maybe it was only half a second, but it took a while before it ignited the powder and then it fired. When it did fire, it did this. They were black on the outside. Okay, so that actually tells me something. But to start off with the click bang, what actually happened? In that I tried 5, 3 fired, 2 didn't. Too nervous pulling them out, and I thought, okay, what was wrong here? My summation of that was that the double flash hole, the double firing hole, or where your primer burns through, there was one for the 50, and then there's another one in my adapter that went to the large rifle primer, Magnum large rifle primer. is that that was too long, and that meant that the flame, it took too long to ignite things, and that was the problem. So I thought, okay, that's really simple. What I'll do is I'll take those rounds and I'll bore the hole out. So I've got a nice big 8mm hole, so what is it, a larger than a quarter hole. So there's lots of room where the powder can go straight through onto the back of the little adapter, onto a normal little burning hole in the back there. A little thinner than brass normally, but straight onto the back of it. That was, I thought, would be the cure. That actually made it worse. This test, I had 2 fire and 3 not fire, with the click, bang, same delay, and then 3 not fire. So it was actually worse. And I haven't pulled these apart, but I know what I'm going to find if I do pull them apart. That powder's going to go on a funny yellow colour and half stuck together. And what I'm suspecting is the opposite to what I thought. What I'm suspecting is that with the larger holes, as the powder managed to get right through and touch the primer, and in that situation, the way the powder burns is it needs a flame on it for a little while, which is milliseconds or less than milliseconds, but that creates it to burn, that creates it to fire, and by not being able to throw a flame because the powder was right down in it, caused it to put the flame out, put the primer flame out. That's my summation of what's actually happening. And I think I could fix that. I think that I could actually change that to make the adapter have the right size flash hole to let it burn the powder, because I've certainly used this powder with these primers and it works. So it's something to do with that hole size, but there's a different problem actually looking at. And I saw this with the 416 as well, with a small fire in it, is this black around the outside of it. There's 2 things notable. There's black around the outside of it, and if you look up the top here, compared to the round that did fire, is this has got the blackness of where this is pressed up against the actual neck in the chamber, and this is not got the blackness. What it tells you, and the way a round basically works, is when it goes bang, it instantly shocks and pushes the brass out. The brass seals because it expands against the neck in your chamber, and then all the gas forces behind the bullet and everything's sealed off behind there. By having a slower, which is what I was trying to achieve, but having that slower ignition, it actually forces and gets the bullet out, gets it moving, and gets enough gas coming back to where the gas comes around the whole thing and the brass doesn't expand because the shock isn't enough there at the start of the firing. So it means that ultimately this situation, this brass is designed for the heavy side of things to get that expansion in this sort of size, and that would be the same for the 416, is that maybe I could fine tune it, maybe there's things you could try and find that little gap there, but I think it's a fail. I think that truthfully the little bit of extra accuracy I'm looking for is not worth the pain of this at the moment. I think it's stop anyway. And that's largely done by the fact there's an extra bit of stability I've just gained out of what I've done up the front here. So listen, maybe some other people test this further. I would have to say, when I first suggested this to one particular person, he said, oh, it's been tried and it doesn't work, they don't fire. Well, listen, I can make them fire, and I'm pretty sure I could make them fire consistently, but it doesn't work. So he was right. It comes back to the making that brass seal with the slower burn on this amount of powder, yada yada, isn't actually working. Maybe I'll try a little further, but like I said, I'm in a place where it's really time to stop. I've got something to carry on with. Normal power, normal primers for both of those rounds, for the 416 and the 50 BMG. It still is a great big thumping rifle. It still is a lot of effort, and if you want to shoot ultra long range, I wouldn't be recommending the giant ones. They're not easier, they're not more effective. Yes, if you're trying to take down the Tyrannosaurus Rex at 2 miles, then probably this is a better choice. But if you're target shooting, there's a lot better choices down the range a little bit. Okay, next bit. This little thing I got sitting here, this is just really more a show and tell. This is actually, we didn't actually have a camera on up the front there. I'm really sharing this because I found out stuff. I was planning on getting this all sorted and then go and actually show some, I was hoping to see better groups and more consistency out of the smaller primer, but as I said, fail. But we were shooting at a target, and this is one of the early shots where it just shot short, bounced up onto target, and this is actually, and I'll put some images on there so you can see it, but quite a nice little bit of artwork. But that's what happens to a 50 BMG bullet that's leaving the muzzle at 2,600 feet per second. That's an 800 grain piece of of copper. I haven't actually weighed it, but it looks like it would still weigh 800 grams, and quite an interesting little pattern. When it hit right at the top of target, it hit, and you can see it actually bent around the top of the target as it went there, flicked up, hit a piece of wood, and then landed 20 feet behind the target. Nice and bright and shiny, so we saw it. But fascinating piece of carnage from, like I said, an 800 grain piece of copper that hit the target. I think that's it for these bits and pieces. We will go through and do that. And actually now I've figured all this out, set up some proper rounds. By the way, this isn't my bullet. This is some bullets that we had to do some testing with previously. Still nice heavy bullets that do the right thing. We're doing the testing with. They're 760 grains. But yeah, do some more testing with that. That's starting to make sense. And as said, I think the large rifle primers are a fail at this stage, and we'll carry on with the rest of what we're going here. I think that's about the bits and pieces I wanted to touch base on with the rifle side of things. I suppose the other thing I should, I don't know if it's warranted or not, but I still feel I should say something about it, and that's the coronavirus that's all over the world and sending the world into panic. I would like to see a little more said on the fact that it is, for all the lethality that is potential on that side of things, and I think they're talking about 3% or some big number like that. I think those numbers are all a little skew at the moment. The truth of it is it's a flu, and from what we read and understand, it's, for some people it's nothing more than a sniffle. For other people it can be pretty serious, and obviously if you're health compromised or you're breathing compromised and that sort of stuff, then being a double lung impact thing, which is unusual about this disease, that it could get you worse. So, and obviously all of the concern is about protecting our health system from being overloaded, so our hospitals and doctors and nurses and that side of things. And that's what all this is about. It's not as scary as, for most of us, it's not going to be anything more than a serious flu. And for, I think, a moderate number, and certainly the kids in that sort of part of the world, they are going to be barely affected by it. So the hysteria that's going with things is more our concern, the panic buying and the craziness over toilet paper and things like that. For us that are a little more prepared, that's obviously it's good to be in that place, but I think I would like to see a little more of the fact that this isn't a great big deadly thing coming after you to take everyone out and you can't get sick in any circumstances. There probably is a reasonable logic to actually getting the flu and getting your own antibodies and that side of things, like we used to do with chicken pox and the measles and things like that. As kids, we were all, part of it. Was good that we had it, and it was good that we'd been through and done it, because then we're immune to it. So I think there's probably a little bit of the same logic to go with this here. But I suppose my upshot of it is, listen, stay safe, be healthy and look after yourselves. Try and stay out of the crazy zones and the big crowds of people. Well, I never thought they were a good idea anyway. But anyway, that's about what I've got to say. Like I said, stay safe, be well, everyone. Thanks for checking in on us, and we'll catch you next time.
Got the coat pin. Awesome shot. Hit the can.